Welcome everybody. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the development plan process. Some of you may well know this already. One or two you may well have actually heard this presentation before, so I'll try and keep it fairly short. But I think it's important for those that haven't heard it just to give you some bit of context as to what we're at and where we're at in the process. Okay, so what is a development plan? Well, the development plan is made by the members of the local authority. That's an important distinction between, the executive functions that are performed by the officials and the reserve functions that are carried out by the members. So the members of the local authority will adopt a new development plan for the city and county, and that will set out a broad range of policies and objectives for the next 6-year period and beyond. It will give us a context for our interventions, our spending, our I suppose, investment priorities over the next number of years. And it also gives a context for our applications to central government and to other agencies for funding through that period. It's important that everybody sees that what we're doing is joined up and that we're moving in a particular direction and that all of our actions and activities are supportive of an overall vision. So the development plan, typically it's a printed document. They're getting bigger and bigger every time they're reviewed because there are more and more legislative requirements. But in our case, we've got a number of volumes that will deal with the city and the county. And then beyond that, we'd have appendices that would deal with more technical items like lists of protected structures, lists of views and prospects and environmental assessments, that type of thing. But the bulk of the policy, I suppose, that the majority of people will be interested in, you'll find in the first 2 volumes. And then there's the 3rd volume, which sets out the rules and regulations for development. That's our development management standards, things like separation distances and minimum room sizes and garden sizes, all that sort of stuff. And then the plan will be accompanied by a series of maps, and this is one of the maps from the last city and current city development plan, which was due to run from 2013 to 2019. Typically, you'll see a zoning map like this, which will show you different land uses for different areas. So you can be reasonably sure that if you're buying a property in an area or if you're living across the road from an area, by looking at the zoning map, you could reasonably anticipate what's going to happen into the future. Is it going to be open? Is it going to be developed? Is it industry? Is it housing? What is it going to be? So our development plan sits within a hierarchy of plans that are adopted at national, regional and local level. You've got the national plan, which is the national planning framework, and that sets out the overarching I suppose objectives for the state as set by government. We will be looking at trying to rebalance growth across the country as part of that national planning framework, refocusing on the regional cities of Cork, Galway, Limerick and Waterford, and trying to take some of the pressure off Dublin and other broad issues that need to be dealt with at a national level. That's then followed up by a series of regional plans. There are 3 regions for planning purposes. We're in the southern region, and the Southern Regional Assembly would have adopted a regional plan for the southern region that came into force last year in 2020, January 2020. And that deals, as I say, with the southern region, but has a particular emphasis on the cities, again carrying through this priority of metropolitan growth outside of Dublin. So again, concentrating in Cork, Limerick, Galway, and in our instance, Waterford, and contains a metropolitan area spatial plan, which deals with the city and the area around it. So then below that regional level, we've got our local plans, and the local plan in our case will be the Waterford City and County Development Plan 2022 to 2028. That will replace all existing local planning policy when it's adopted. And below that, again, there would be another level of plans, which would be the local area plans. Those would typically be done for our larger urban areas, places like Tramore, Dungarvan, Portlaw would have their own local area plans. Maybe parts of the city might have their own local area plans. If there were particular areas within the city that needed a particular focus, we can develop a local area plan for that. And other areas like maybe the Gaeltacht in Asia, that's an area that has particular issues that need to be dealt with, and it would be appropriate to do a local plan to deal with those. So that's the hierarchy. As I said, those are the plans that are in place at the moment. The National Planning Framework on the left, adopted in May 2018, followed then a year and a half later by the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy. And here we are a year and a half later again, looking at the local planning policy, which is Waterford City and Counties Development Plan. We have 3 development plans at the moment, which is part of the challenge, is trying to bring these together into one plan. We had a merger of the local authorities in June 2014, which resulted in Waterford City and County Council. But prior to that, we would have had different local authorities with their own development plans. So we have a city development plan, we have a county development plan, we also have a Dungarvan town development plan. Now, all of those plans are still valid. We're still operating them to this day, even though they're largely out of date. They would have been due to expire in some cases 4 years ago with the old county development plan, but they've continued on because we were told by government basically that we were to hold and not adopt a new plan until the national planning framework was in place, followed up by the regional strategy, and then we would do our local plan. So again, following in that hierarchy. So we've been waiting and waiting, but eventually, our opportunity has come. So now's the time to, I suppose, reimagine what we want to try and achieve across the city and county, and try and work with you, the stakeholders, our members, and other agencies to try and deliver for the city and county. The local area plans I mentioned earlier, those are 3 that are in place at the moment, Tramore, Lismore and Portlaw. Again, they contain that level of detail that you won't get in a county plan. I suppose the county plan will deal with things like land use zoning and broad targets in terms of housing and population. But if you want to know which footpath is going to be upgraded and which local interventions are going to be made at that sort of local level, you need to look towards the local area plan to get that level of detail. We've also got a series of guidelines that we have to have regard to. Every local authority is obliged to do this. The minister typically would issue a set of guidelines, maybe 2 a year, maybe every second year. Sometimes there might be a break of a couple of years, but all of these guidelines remain in place until such time as they're either withdrawn or replaced. And those would give us guidance on things like building heights and telecommunications, flooding, flood risk management, all of that type of stuff. And again, every local authority has to have regard to this, and they're forming part of that background picture that we have to reflect in our plan. So as I said, the plan has to provide an overarching strategic vision for the city and the county, set out integrated policies and objectives that, again, we would rely upon when we're making interventions ourselves or where we're seeking support from central government funding, that type of thing. It has to be consistent with national regional planning policy, including the guidelines, which were referenced on the previous slide. Should be evidence-based and objectively anticipate the future needs of all groups within society. So inclusive, but at the same time, not so aspirational as not to be realistic, and to stand a reasonable chance of success and implementation. It should be a catalyst for positive change and progress, and ensure protection of the environment and heritage, which is critical in everything that we do. As I say, it's adopted by the members of the local authority, so it's often described as a social contract between the council and the people of the council, of the county, of the functional area. It's, there's a public consultation process such as this that we're going through. There are actually 3 public consultations throughout the project, and everything is done out in the open. Everything is done in public, and the council is bound by its own development plan, and we assess all planning applications that come to us against that development plan. So it is the rule book, and if the council at any stage want to deviate from their own development plan, there's a very detailed legal process that we have to go through, which is called material contravention procedure. We don't have a free hand once the plan is adopted. As I say, it's that contract, is that agreement between the people and the representatives, the councillors, as to where the money is going to be spent and what's going to be done over the next 6 years and beyond. The layout and content is pretty well established by the legislation. It's the Planning and Development Act 2000. It gives a long list of things that must be included. Now, we can obviously go beyond this list, but these are the things that we have to include. Things like protected areas, natural heritage, Gaeltacht areas, archaeological heritage, land use, zoning. All of these things have to be included in the plan. And if they're not, the department will be on to us. The Regional Assembly, the Office of the Planning Regulator will be on to us telling us we missed a trick, we need to go back, we need to cover this particular topic. But as I say, it's not exhaustive. We can obviously go beyond that. These are the minimum requirements. It's, as I say, evidence-based. Everything that we do has to be rooted in evidence. So we look to things like the quarterly household surveys. We look to the census of population. We've commissioned reports from outside agencies. Aero in Maynooth University have done a lot of work with us in terms of mapping population change, socioeconomic profiling of the county, where people work, where the unemployment black spots are, how far people travel to and from work, and all of that is brought into the plan and informs the policy. So this is the process. As I say, it's a 2-year process. It's a long process, but you know, each step is critical. The first step is the background research, analysis, briefing of the members, scoping of a strategic environmental assessment, and drafting of an issues paper. Now that's all done. The issues paper went on public display. We had a series of events such as this one that we're having now tonight. We would have listened to what the people had to say. We brought all those comments back to the council chamber, both your written submissions as well as anything that we picked up in direct conversations and consultation with the public. The members considered all of those submissions. The members, being the councillors within the council chamber, considered all those submissions and then issued a direction to the chief executive of the local authority as to what they wanted to see in their plan. The officials then, we went off and we started drafting the plan on behalf of the members, and would have brought it back to the members on a regular basis. Did a lot of workshopping, a lot of time spent on this with the members, a lot of to and fro, a lot of tweaking. Eventually, we arrived at a draft plan that the members were satisfied with to put on public display. That's the plan, which is now currently on display, and we're having our second round of public consultation now to see what you think of that. You'll tell us either through our website or directly, or by email or whatever form, you know, maybe through direct consultation, which are or contact with your councillors, what you think of the plan. That goes back into the council chamber. The councillors will consider all of that and will make amendments, changes to the plan, and the changes will go on display again for a third round of public consultation. That would be the early part of next year. And then once that consultation has been finished and once the members have weighed everything up, they will then adopt a final plan. And that would be towards the middle of next year, about June of next year, we would expect to have a new plan in place. The website you've seen already, I'm sure. That's probably how you landed here today. It's consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. If you go onto that website, you'll see all the documents, all the appendices, all of the maps, everything that you need to see is there. An awful lot of background information. There's 13 or 14 appendices, there's 4 volumes, and as I say, all the maps are there. And through that website, again, there's a portal whereby you can make your submissions, and would encourage everybody to make a submission through the portal because it helps us, I suppose, to coordinate and track and report back the feedback that we're getting from yourselves. Now, there are other ways, and Marcus will walk you through those later on as to how you may engage if you have a difficulty with that. But I think, you know, it's been designed in such a way as to be very user-friendly and very interactive. So again, we hope that you can engage through that, make your submissions known to us. And we'll take those on board, bring them back to your councillors, and undoubtedly there will be changes to this draft. It's a working document, and we will make changes, the council will make changes, and hopefully those changes will reflect or at least address some of the issues that you might raise tonight or raise in your submissions directly to ourselves. So that's about it. The consultation runs until the end of the month of August, so there's a full month and a bit left yet. You know, we're available in the planning department if you want to pick up the phone, or if you want to email us, or if you want to contact us at any stage, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, once Hugh and Marcus have given their presentations, we'll throw it open to the floor.
Brilliant. And thank you very much, Liam, for that presentation. And just to note that if anybody has any questions on the process outlined by Liam, please put them into the chat there. And also just to note that the closing date is the 30th of August at 5 p.m. for submissions. So I'll just hand over now to Hugh O'Brien, who's going to give us an overview of placemaking policy and the key specific development objectives for the area.
Hi, thanks, Melissa. And thanks, Liam. I'll just get this onto the slideshow here. Hopefully it will work. We had some glitches earlier. Can you see that?
Yep,
Vanessa, is that?
that's perfect, Hugh. Yeah.
Thanks, and thanks again for I see some returning visitors on to this event. So thanks for tuning in again after putting up with us last week for a few nights. Yeah, well, I suppose the purpose is really just taking a quick look at placemaking and what I suppose direction we're proposing as part of the draft development plan in relation to placemaking. And most of that information really is set out in Chapter 8 and to an additional, I suppose, information in relation to specific locations and to specific settlements or parts of settlement is set out in Appendix 2. But I suppose like many of the other themes that we discussed maybe last week, for some of you who are joining again, like climate change and like biodiversity and like mobility, and they none of them really fit neatly into one specific chapter, but it's important just to be able to pick up the pieces throughout the document. Relating to them, and that's the case for placemaking as well. But in the main, Chapter 8 is the place to look. So in terms of the strategic objectives, I suppose what we're saying is those objectives include to promote a diverse choice of places which are attractive, of a high quality design, centered on human scale and accessible to all. These will act as the heart of every community across Waterford City and County. This will be achieved by strengthening sustainable connections between people and place, promoting exemplar urban design, diversity of built form, uses and outdoor spaces resulting in positive social interactions, reduced carbon emissions and greater opportunities for biodiversity. So those are our overarching, I suppose, objectives. Now, in terms of I suppose, what underpins the whole policy objectives and our own thinking as well, as Liam suggested, we are, as part of the development plan process, we are obliged to have due regard to the policy objectives and directions of both the National Planning Framework and the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy, and indeed for Waterford City, the Metropolitan Area Strategic Plan that's located within the regional policy document. And the NPF, the National Planning Framework, put forward a very simple sort of wheel diagram, looking at a hierarchy of places and what I suppose can be realistically, what level of services and what sort of I suppose, as it's set out in that diagram, like the different elements of skills, health, social service, sort of environment, commercial, justice, productivity, and networks. When you look at all those different aspects of a place, I suppose it gives an indication as to what sort of level of service you would anticipate for different settlements based on their size and their scale, for instance. So it's an important thing just to have due regard to, I suppose, and I think you know, every settlement doesn't neatly fit into that sort of typology, but I think it is a good way to sort of manage an expectation about what might be achievable realistically in any particular settlement. So that's on page 176. So it might be just a good idea if you wanted to have a look at that. Some of you are probably familiar with it already. But I suppose the strategic policy following on from those strategic objectives really is that through community engagement, develop a network of distinct places which are resilient, safe, attractive, adaptable, stimulating, which promote sustainable transport modes, which are universally accessible, which enhance the opportunity for social interaction, and which reflect which reflect and respect the diversity of each community. Develop a 10-minute city sort of neighborhood concept to ensure our city and towns are sustainable, livable, and based primarily on the need for the broader resident community, and enshrine placemaking in all developments across the city and county to create socially sustainable communities and environments. So there's a lot in those, And I suppose the chapter 8 tries to address those in a number of different ways, well, in 4 particular ways. And those four main principles, I suppose, of which underpin placemaking are set out in this diagram. Again, it's in section 8. But just looking at sort of the 4 main principles around sociability and interaction, access and linkages, that sort of connectivity piece around permeability and linking people with their daily activities, the different uses and indeed the activities themselves, and looking at comfort and image, and how people, I suppose, feel about their place, what sets their place aside from any other place. So I suppose that, the end result here is a Waterford city and county that's distinctive in its own settlements and its rural places as well. And that we're not sort of, we're replicating, I suppose, for instance, the high street that you might find in any city or any town, if you know what I mean, or indeed any, looking at housing estate design, or looking at, rural house design, all these sort of pieces that are important to ensuring that, I suppose, that we try and keep a distinctive sort of Waterford, as opposed to any other county. In the main, I suppose the policy objectives focus on delivering those 4 main principles. But overall, I suppose, as I said earlier, we're looking at being consistent, I suppose, with national policy objectives of the National Planning Framework. There's a number of them there, all again dealing with a place and regeneration. RPO 61, the whole idea of looking at how healthy our places are and ensuring that there's an element of I suppose, designing health into how people use their neighborhoods and their places on a daily basis. And as I said earlier, that 10-minute neighborhood concept and a sort of town centre first approach. Looking at active land management, regeneration opportunities, and the move towards reversing decline in all our town and our settlement centres. And that could be, from a derelict or vacant building to, a significant sort of vacant brownfield site. We have our selection of those. I think it's important that we sort of engage and, I suppose, get stuck into seeing how we might bring those back to life, either for a commercial basis or a commercial stroke community purpose. But again, there's as I said earlier, there's no one solution, I suppose, design solution or design layout that would address the different, I suppose, challenges for each of these sites. A policy drive, I suppose, again, through the regional spatial economic strategy towards new homes in small towns and villages, again, trying to breathe some life back into our smaller settlements in particular, and reverse decline through active land management and indeed through, service site and infrastructure and service development, active mobility, and I suppose facilitating alternatives to the private car, maybe as the default, rather than new streets for cars. Vibrancy and vitality, looking at how we can ensure that, how we can ensure a mix of uses and places, quality layout, design and finishes to contribute to uniqueness, and use of statutory and non-statutory planning, I suppose, and the tools around those. In particular, I suppose, as Liam mentioned, there are a number of guidelines and ministerial guidelines and other guidelines that we have due regard to and we're obliged to, and particularly in terms of urban design and placemaking. There are manuals there for best practice. There's looking at our roads and streets and looking at permeability best practice again. They're all national standards and national documents and best practice, I suppose, that we would be adhering to ourselves in our own projects, and indeed we would be requiring private development to comply with as well, or to ensure that they have due regard to them, and proper consideration of context in terms of natural and other, connectivity and inclusivity. variety, I suppose, in terms of what we're building and what we have to build with, and those that built and natural context. Efficiency and distinctiveness, as I said, in terms of layout, how our public realm is provided for and maintained and managed, the adaptability of our spaces, and the privacy and amenity of different spaces, along with parking, wayfinding, and detailed design. So they're all important principles, I suppose, that underpin our overall policies. But I suppose the four key principles, I suppose, that I had shown on that that one of the earlier slides. Again, looking in more detail at access, connectivity, and linkages. Our policies, I suppose, are seeking to ensure that there's a focus on priorities for safe, convenient alternatives to the car. Integrating different age cohorts into public spaces, and ensuring that there's I suppose, more interaction between different age groups, and indeed different ethnic and other backgrounds. Universal design across the public realm to I suppose assist in that integrated cohort piece. Looking at hierarchy of places and streets to promote, I suppose, areas that are more legible and that are more permeable. So people understand them better when they're moving from A to B on a daily basis or otherwise, and that they're safe, as I said earlier, and that they're welcoming, and they're not threatening in any way. And that's no mean feat to achieve that. When you think of how our places and our homes are, I suppose, interacted with on a daily basis, 24 hours. Looking at RPO 176 again, as I mentioned, in terms of access and connectivity, that 10-minute neighborhood concept, I think underpins that in a significant way. And it's not just, I suppose, in terms of new places, but in terms of looking at our existing, I suppose, places and neighborhoods, and seeing how we can maybe retrofit that sort of 10-minute neighborhood concept to permeability. I suppose just in relation to the night's meeting, chapter 3, I suppose, looks at Waterford City, just using it as an example. That builds on and it sort of I suppose promotes as the current plan does, the sort of seven neighbourhoods, looking from the city centre out to the rural area, and looking at the characteristics of that and how we might understand it better and provide policy for it. We've provided some policy in particular, I suppose, for the city around vibrancy and vitality in the main, and how we might manage that, and how we might I suppose promote it and support it through these different principles of placemaking. So it's an important piece I think we need to consider. We also, I suppose, have identified rural character areas, and the one, I suppose, for the Metropolitan area and Tremor, really, I suppose, is looks at what we might do in and around the harbour and Waterford estuary, and to a lesser extent, I suppose, how we look at the Copper Coast. So there's sort of two rural character areas that we need to consider maybe as part of the plan as well, and what best we might be able to do to achieve significant placemaking objectives and goals across them. Appendix 2, as I said earlier, sort of looks at some specific development objectives for different areas, but it's I suppose what we would be saying to people, and certainly for tonight and for the rest of this week, I think our webinars will be trying to I suppose encourage people to look at their own areas and come back to us with some ideas maybe around those. Now, as Liam said as well, there's we will be looking at local area plans and for parts of the city, I would say, in and around our new neighbourhoods, how we can plan them best in and around the sort of city southwest and the city northwest. So that sort of that Kilbarry, Ballybeg area and the Grey Stew area, how we might be able to do some additional planning, statutory and non-statutory planning up there in those locations in terms of local area plans or design frameworks. And we've included some details in relation to the southwest neighbourhood in chapter 3 as well. but I think it's important that we recognize, I suppose, that this is a process. This development plan is a process, and we have some ideas what local specific objectives might be appropriate. But I think the local communities and yourselves are sort of a very valuable asset for us in terms of trying to maybe tease out what sort of new objectives or new ideas we might have around different locations. So, we've had, if you look at the portal, there are some submissions already received. I think there's one there from the Ardmore Tidy Towns with some ideas around, themselves, what they're looking at doing. We've had discussions with some of the people in Dunhill, and some of those submissions have come in as well. So it's kind of important maybe to front load those local area plans as well with some ideas. So while the local area plans and maybe some design frameworks or sort of design statements that we do into the future, once the unitary development plan is done, I think it's important that we sort of maybe front load those a little bit as well in terms of the process that we're at the minute. So in terms of those linkages, again, as I said, that 10-minute neighbourhood concept is important. In terms of principle number 2, the principle number 2, around image, comfort and safety, looking at compact, high quality designs to support local public transport and services, looking at incorporation of natural environment, climate orientation and build features, stroke architectural, particular to the area. So looking at, I suppose, what's unique, as I said, in terms of the context, in terms of either that build context or its natural context, how we can maybe capture those assets and promote them as part of a new design, so that we end up with a place that's not any place or I suppose what are sometimes called anywhere or nowhere, but they're actually a place that we're familiar with and we're proud of. And requirement for design statements, so looking at where we have proposals in terms of 15 housing units or development in excess of 500 square meters, that those proposals are supported by a specific design statement, not a sort of cut and paste, which sometimes is the case. Principle number 3, I suppose, looking at sustainable and attractive multifunctionality in terms of our spaces and our buildings. So looking at, as I said, in the blue-green infrastructure piece, the nature-based solutions, looking at how we can build on those and create networks around those, particularly in terms of biodiversity, how we can make our places more resilient to climate change, looking at passive and active spaces. That open space isn't always, it doesn't always have to be active. It can be passive. It can be for the purpose of biodiversity. But it's important that, I suppose, the design of any location or any new public space has due regard to those sort of different principles, and that is designed appropriately to ensure passive surveillance and that antisocial behaviour doesn't become an issue. Retaining existing natural features and assets, I mentioned that already, in a mix of uses to encourage social interaction and integration, housing type and tenure mix, very important, to, I suppose, to support that intergenerational and that sort of, that better integration with across our age cohorts and across ethnic groups and so on. Looking at higher density with the need to be accompanied by a higher design input, looking at neighbourhoods and settlement centres to be designations on their own right. And then I suppose finally, principle number 4, looking at sociability and inclusivity. So spaces and buildings that support social interaction, balance the need for both privacy and security across spaces. In terms of our own policy focus, looking at what funds are available, and I've just noted this evening the new plan is being, I suppose, promoted by its new budget. So significant money available over the next 10 years for projects under, for instance, the URDF, the Urban Regeneration Development Fund, and indeed the Rural Regeneration Development Fund also under as well under backed another EU I suppose programs such as Green Deal, etc. So I think we're actively involved in that. We would have a significant, I suppose, pipeline of projects, particularly under the URDF for Waterford City, I suppose, given the topic tonight. Looking at I suppose the remaining public spaces that haven't been developed to date, and the public realm areas around Jenkins Lane, Spring Garden Alley, parts of the Quays, and along O'Connell Street. So looking at how we can bring those into better use and into a better, I suppose, better presented for the betterment of the vibrancy and vitality of the city overall, and collaboration with local communities and the users of spaces. I think that's very important, and I think we've stressed that on the previous workshops or the previous webinars, that it's sort of core to what we need to do. And particularly, I think the local area plans and the other sort of non-statutory, maybe village design statements or urban design statements, or design frameworks that we will be putting in place will be focusing on I suppose collating information from local communities and local property users. Just a thanks for attending tonight, and as Liam says, have your say by registering on consult.waterfordcouncil.ie and make your submission before the 30th of August. Okay, thanks. I'll hand you back to Vanessa, and Mark will do a brief presentation now.
Thanks very much, Hugh. And yes, just hand it over to Marcus and say thanks to everyone who's putting in questions already. So after Marcus goes through just how to make your submission and where all the development plan materials are, we'll come and certainly discuss those questions that you've put in, and indeed more that may come through. So thanks, Marcus, over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Good evening, everybody. I'll get through this as quickly as I can, I suppose, to open the floor to Q&A proper. This is our consultation portal. Some of you might be familiar with it. You might have looked at it already. Others might not have had a chance to yet. So basically, this is the address to it's consult.waterfordcouncil.ie. Alternatively, you can navigate it through our own Waterford City and County Council website. This is effectively the homepage. So this will tell you, how to register as a user. And how to make a submission. So, you have to register to make your submission, obviously enough. So once you click in here to your intro homepage, this will bring us to our next tab. Sorry, I just have my tabs open here on top to speed it up as we go along. So this will bring you to our main menu page, which will give us all the details of the plan. Again, here we have some information on our notice period, our consultation periods of the 30th of August, as the lads have already mentioned. You need to scroll down, and here we have a video, a 7-minute video on how to make your online submission. So that'll take you through everything kind of step by step as well if you're having any problems. Alternatively, we're available to answer any of your queries. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll just take you through the plan itself and where it can be found. So here on the right hand side, is the plan itself and all the appendices and maps. So the plan itself is divided into 4 volumes. So volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'll go down through those in a little bit. So volume 1 is split into 3 parts, part 1, 2, and 3 here. So that these are all the various chapters of the plan. So I suppose what Hugh was maybe referring to tonight was placemaking, and that's in chapter 8. So again, if you were to click into that placemaking section, then you get the chapter itself. On the left-hand side, it'll give you just your introduction. And as you scroll down, that will give you an option to download the chapter in its entirety and have a read of it printed off or whatever you need to do. So again, those are the various chapters of the plan. Volume 2 contains the development management standards, which is essentially the rule book of the development plan against which all proposed developments are measured. It's a list of design standards, car parking standards, things like that. And that every project will have to meet. Volume 3 will provide you a list of all the appendices. So we have 20 appendices. Some of them are separated out into, you'll see below, into the environment reports here. And that'll give you the full list of the 20. They're quite heavy documents, so we've kind of split out the environment reports just for just for ease, I suppose. So then all the different appendices are here. So whatever, area you're interested in. So I think for if there's design framework for the City West neighborhood, or Appendix 2, as you was talking about earlier on, will give you your specific design objectives. So again, that's here. You just click on that, will give you your table of all the development objectives. So that's I suppose the list of appendices where you'll find every single one of those. Again, these are our environmental reports here, which are all the other appendices: your strategic flood risk assessment, your strategic environmental assessment, your appropriate assessment document. They all can be found here in your environmental reports. Again, if you want to look at our mapping, which I'll take you through now, these are all contained in volume 4. So this is our story maps. So we have 6 maps, and each of these I suppose story maps have individual maps with them. Again, so say for example, if you want to look at our settlement and zoning maps, so you just click in here, and again, this will take you to your map number 2. These maps are very user-friendly, very interactive. So again, it'll take you through your settlement hierarchy of the count. Sorry, you have to click here to view your map. This is a kind of a home page again. So it'll take you through your settlements hierarchy, settlement boundaries, land use zoning and flood zone, and then specific development objectives. So you click to view that map, and again, that's just here. Now, there we go. There's our settlement hierarchy for the county. So I'll just, I suppose, drag down through this kind of quickly, and you can see the city here, and as we go up to Dungarvan, Clonmel and Virons, there are main towns. Again, you can zoom in and zoom out of, whatever particular area you want to look at. Hierarchy for the county again. This boundaries and functions identifies, I suppose, for some of the smaller settlements, the built envelope of the settlement itself, rather than specifically zoning every single settlement. We've kind of maybe drawn a boundary around each of those smaller settlements within which development can take place, as long as it's in accordance with the general principles of the plan. Again, you can pull that out, zoom in and out to whatever area you need to look at. As we go down there, we have our rural settlement functions. This is another layer that we've developed with showing Stradbally here and the various different amenities in the settlement. Now we'll come on down to our zoning and flood mapping shortly. Sorry. Here we go, our zoning and flood map. So this takes us immediately to Dungarvan. Obviously, you can just pull it over to look at the city area. So I'll just do that here just to show you how simple that is. So again, you're into Waterford City, and the map builds as you go. So down the bottom here we have I can move this little icon out of the way. Yeah, out of here we have our legend for the map. So that will give you the GZTs or the zonings for each of the areas. So if you have a specific area you want to look at, you just click whatever area that may be, and that'll tell you all about it. You can zoom into it. Again, whatever you need to be doing. So there's a bit of discovery, I suppose, to do with these maps. But again, they're all fairly, simple enough to use, and something we're very kind of proud. It's a real unique way of presenting information as well. So again, that zoning map is overlain with flood mapping as well. So you can have a look at the flood zones that are derived from the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment Appendix, and how that relates to whatever particular area you're looking at. Again, we have specific development objectives that I spoke about earlier on. So again, that will bring you to, say for Ardmore, you're looking at, and you click into each of those and see exactly what the policies are. And again, there's a combined map at the end. I'll take you just quickly through 2 other little quick maps. So if you were looking at our transport map, so again, that will be in your mapping section here. Sorry, volume 4 maps. Click in your transport map there, and that will bring you direct to this page. So it sets out our transport objectives for the city immediately, and you can zoom in, zoom out of that. And there's recreational routes also identified. As we go down, all these designations then are overlain with the zoning. So again, you can just click in, click out find your particular area and what relates to it. There's mapping related to Waterford Airport as well. And again, we have our combined transport maps then of the entire county, the Waterford with the airport mapping as well. So that's just kind of a general overview of all the county. Again, as I said, you can navigate to whatever particular part of the county you're looking at in specifics. Finally, then there's built heritage maps also. So I just have kind of shortcutted to the tab here on the combined map just to show you. So that's taken in Tramore by default. So again, it'll, you can navigate to wherever you want. So these are, the various icons. So we just say, for example, this one is, a protected structure that's already identified there. So those are, I suppose, some of the features that are available to you. Again, it's all fairly easily navigated from your homepage. So you can dip in and dip out of what you need. You can download what you want to your desktop, print it off, come back, have a look at it later on. Make your submissions based on that. So I suppose what we would, as Liam and Hugh have already kind of stated, we would encourage you to make your submissions through the portal, because it helps us to collate them and to tag them and to eventually, I suppose, generate reports that are, into our chief executive's report. So every submission that would come through, we would prepare, we would have an assessment of it, prepare a response to it, and formulate that as part of our chief executive's report, which goes to the members for adoption. So that's where the changes or amendments to the plan would occur. So we would encourage you to use the portal. Alternatively, we will take submissions in written format as well, as you can see here. But ultimately, we'll be uploading it to the portal anyway. So I suppose it would, shortcut that for us. But if you're not comfortable using the portal, then you can send it in to us in writing. Again, what I'll do is I'll open up the floor to Q&A now, just to get the ball rolling. I suppose that's why we're all here. So thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Vanessa.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that very clear presentation, Marcus. So yes, we will now move to our discussion part of the evening, and what we'll do is, first you can raise your hand if you'd like to pop in with any direct question, but a number of questions have come into the chat there, so we'll just work through some of those. I'd like to first just start with a question from Anna that has come in just before in a couple of other sessions, just regard clarity between the different consultation phases and the importance of putting in and the role of your submission at the different stages in the plan. Anna, would you like to unmute and come in there with your question?
Hello. I got some answer to my question from Liam McGree already, but of course, I would love to know what to do to make my submission, noticed for the next time, because it didn't get any traction this time. I'll try to maybe get some more support from the locality and I don't know, the councillors.
Sure, thanks, Anna. And I guess just before one of the team comes in there to answer you, somebody on the team might just pick up with the fact that I suppose the traction is seen in the chief executive's report or the response to it, they not necessarily getting comments and feedback on the portal itself. So would somebody like to just pick up on Anna's point there and just highlight where she can also find the chief executive's report in terms of responses to submissions in the first stage?
The chief executive's report, I think, is probably on the old portal. So whether that's immediately accessible or at the minute, I can check that out and just see if it is accessible. If it's not, we can make it available. It would have been on the I suppose the old consult portal that we, or the old on Waterford or Consult Waterford, but it would have been published as part of the pre-draft submission stage, so we can double check on that. But I think I can hear what Anna is saying. I suppose in terms of, there's two things. One was I suppose ensuring that your submission is noted and it is brought back before the council. that's one thing, and that's what the portal is designed to do. So it's designed to ensure that I suppose when somebody makes that submission, that it finds its way to that chief executive's report, as Marcus said, and that there's what we have to do as the professional planners is we have to I suppose look at that submission, make a response or make a recommendation and a response from the chief executive to the elected members on it. And that's the second part, I suppose, of the equation, which I don't know what the content of the submission was, but I suppose they have to be the submissions have to be considered in the round, I suppose, in terms of what the plan is trying to do. A lot of the time, I think we do get submissions in that are maybe too locational specific or too focused, and it's important to remember that the I suppose the unitary plan is a strategic document. It's to such in any of the legislation and any of the guidelines. So it's important to sort of have that idea in mind. As I said, our local area plans, some of our settlements will be subject to local area plans, which will be a little bit more granular in detail. And we'll also be looking at how we might be able to devise non-statutory plans, I suppose, for other settlements or areas. So each of those processes will be accompanied by a piece on consult.council. So I think we'll be advertising that in due course. But again, none of that sort of lower level granular local area planning won't be taking place until we have until this time next year. We will hopefully have the city and county plan made, and we'll be actively considering what we can do with the other areas after that.
Thanks, Hugh. Audit, if you'd like to come back in, or you're okay with that answer?
No, thanks very much, Hugh. And that might have been an issue there with the too granular approach. But then again, I'm just never sure that whether anybody is aware that just how fragmented the area is. But that's maybe I'll try to describe that better. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And what we'll do is we will find the link to the Chief Executive's report and put that in the chat now shortly. And just again, this is a new stage in the process. So again, just please put in your submission on the draft of the plan. Thanks for that. So just moving on to Rita. So Rita raised a question there about retrofitting neighbourhoods to improve the sense of place. And then there's some discussion about permeability, potentially connecting of green spaces. Rita, would you like to come in on that point?
Oh, hi. Hi,
Rita.
Vanessa, sorry. Yeah, it's just, I suppose, because there's a lot of houses built already and how you can create better community, really. Because I suppose place and community kind of go hand in hand. And I think having greater sense of community is really important, like with climate change and difficulties ahead. So it's just some areas like, say, out the Dunmore Road, there's lots of houses. And I mean, Arkeen has a great sense of community, I think, but there's the fragmentation with the roundabouts in particular, in terms of that kind of fragments it a bit. That's just one area, but it's, I mean, just that will retrofitting be looked at? And I do totally see the issue around permeability and people, they can be antisocial behaviour, and it's a real problem and a genuine problem, and it's very difficult. But just to know how much emphasis there would be on trying to retrofit, I suppose.
Thanks, Rita.
Yeah, just in relation to that, Rita, I suppose this has come up, I suppose, on a number of occasions, I suppose, with the elected members as well. At the between the pre-draft stage and where we're at the minute. So in preparing the draft, we've had some dialogue around this, and it is, and I think it's like place itself. No two places are going to be the same. And I probably didn't emphasize it enough, but one of the key pieces in placemaking is the community itself. And very often, communities may not wish permeable links to be put in place. So we have to have due regard to that. But I do take your point. There are other places that are that are well, I suppose if you look at the Dunmore Road links across at Farnshaneen, you know, those and indeed the other link in between I'm not sure the estate, but the one into the back of Arkeen Village there and to the Aldi car park. I mean, they've all sort of, I suppose, you know, grown organically over time, and they work. But I think it's important that we maybe we look at some of those and try and make them a little bit more formal in their presentation. But that costs money, I suppose. We're fortunate, I think, that the NTA do have some funding that can be obtained to look at putting these in place. And again, as I said, a lot of that will be, a lot of the design and the layout of that, I suppose, will be front loaded by community consultation. So I think we're and I think it came through from the transportation. Anybody that was at the webinar last week, I think, you know, that I think it might have been yourself, Rita, who asked Fergus the question on budget. So I think it's clear that, you know, there is a drive nationally to start to spend more money on these sort of sustainable transport links, and, you know, facilitating sustainable transport modes as opposed to the private car. So I think we're in a very interesting phase of that. But I think we do need to sort of look maybe more aggressively at where we might be able to do this retrofitting, because it's not just in Waterford City. I mean, I can think of plenty of locations in Tramore and indeed Dungarvan, for instance, maybe to a lesser extent smaller settlements. Certainly there's scope there for improvement. But I think, as I said, you know, we're probably happy to be in that space and try and push those things forward.
Thanks. Could I just quickly on that just say about, as well as permeability, like say down around Penrose Lane, you know, there's lots of little pocket places around the city really where you could have, you could even try, you know, pop-up things have become quite popular. But, you know, I'm particularly thinking of, there's car parking just at the Glen, kind of that. I think there was something looked at for that area before, but just like open spaces or places, particularly where there's high density housing and not much really for children, nowhere for children to go. There are children living in those apartments, and just sort of little pocket parks, even if you, those sort of things, or pop-up kind of, as well as the permeability. I suppose anything that makes community really, or community audits even, to feed into what services are missing. There was one I saw, but it was quite a while ago, community services audit, and like they seem really important because things change obviously quite, particularly these days.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, that's just all. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I think we've included. I'm just trying to look here now. We did a community audit to support, or just when we were looking at our settlements, and it's I think it's Appendix 15 is sort of that settlement local service inventory, what we call it. So that's in there in Volume 3. So maybe have a look at that. But again, it was based on again, what we could elicit from our own information, and from what we got from, I suppose, public consultation and from the different sections within the council. But I think the LECPs have to be done as well. Has to be done. So it'll be, you know, I think there's a lot of information there. It's always, I mean, you know, even in collating the draft plan as we have in front of us, you know, there's a lot of work in trying to pull all that information together. There's a lot of information out there. It's just it's getting it in one place and keeping it updated is the challenge, I think.
Thanks a million. Yeah, that's a huge thing. Yeah, thanks. Okay,
thanks very much, Rita. Moving on, Alan has a question. Alan, if you'd like to come in there, just related to the Copper Coast. I know you raised the point there about rubbish bins on the beaches, but I think that's for the environment section. I think Liam came in on that, but also with regard to how promotion of the Copper Coast can be, I suppose, balanced with the aim to reduce the reliance on cars. Before you come in there, Alan, just let Anna know that the link there to the Chief Executive's report is posted there in chat, so you'll be able to read that and find where your submission should be listed with the responses from the Chief Executive. Okay, Alan, would you like to come in on your point there? You're just on mute there, Alan.
There we go. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, the Copper Coast is beautiful, and the roads are small or narrow, and the car parks are small, and that's part of the attraction of the place, and also then because of the environment, we're trying to reduce the dependency on private cars, and I'm a private car owner, and that's how I get to the Copper Coast, and so it's a major challenge for Waterford City and Council over the next 6 years to manage this one. But even aside the private car issue, just how the attraction of the place can be maintained if, when we're talking about placemaking, it would seem that along with placemaking becomes more promotion or publicity just because the place is named. I mean, the fact it's become the Copper Coast, it used to be called that, and then that was achieved, and it was a great achievement. But how is the council going to manage then that area environmentally, strategically, in relation to numbers and access and all of these things? I don't know if Liam or Hugh or any of you have any ideas on this, but I think it's a major challenge.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, if I can just come in, Alan. Yeah, it is a challenge. There's no doubt about that. But I suppose what we're trying to do in the plan is sort of set some sort of form of a policy framework that we can maybe start looking at those areas in a little bit more detail, because each of those, and it's really, I suppose, we're coming at it, and I do take your point that the Copper Coast is unique in terms of its UNESCO designation. So I think there's that element, which is an aside, I suppose, from the other the issues that you're talking about, which really looks at how we manage those facilities, those settlements. And I think what we'd be hoping to try and do is to look at the different settlements in there and the different communities, and look at what their I suppose their strengths and what opportunities they have to maybe form part of the answer, if you know what I mean. So there's an economic bit to that, and there's the function and role and function of those different settlements as to whether they can, you know, for instance, Copper Coast, you have Anstown, you have Bunmahan, you'd have Stradbally, I suppose, on the edge of it. You'd have Tramore on the edge of it. You know, Tramore might be the place that you know might facilitate additional bed nights. You know, Bunmahan certainly, and Knockmahan would have they would be the central focus for the geological bit and for the heritage piece. You know, so there's different. I think there's a lot of work we need to do in terms of, I suppose, our sort of strategies around those, and I mentioned that as well for the likes of the Comer Uplands, the Blackwater, and the estuary, and indeed the Gaeltacht na Naoise. So I think we have to do a little bit more probing in terms of what we might be able to do out there, and look at how we can maybe manage the activities of those areas in a sustainable way. But that's not going to be an easy fix, and it's going to be a long fix, I think, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at you know, the pressure on Bunmahan with the good weather both last year and this year, and you know all the traffic problems better than I do.
Yeah.
But I mean, the huge, whatever about the mining thing and all that, I mean, the huge attraction is the beach, and then walk up to Tronamo and all that along there. I mean, it's just fabulous. And again, how is it done without increasing traffic, and how is it done without destroying the attraction of the place and all of those places you mentioned, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe you know, there are lessons learned from COVID, I suppose, that, you know, if we need to do something, we can do quickly. You know, so and there's an element of that, I think, that a lesson we might learn. Because you're right. I mean, I've seen it here in Tramore as well. You know, all the staycations and the need for, you know, a bit more traffic management, and we've seen it with the sort of the open air dining, the outside dining, and what we can try and achieve with that if we sort of be a little bit more inventive. You know, there are solutions to these. We just need to dig down, I suppose, and through collaboration with the local communities and with interest groups, you know, we need to just start knocking heads and coming up with solutions and getting money to sort of implement them as well.
And I can ask one more question. Is there pressure from the local communities for economic development, or are the local communities, like you mentioned, Anstown, Bowman and so on, are they generally happy with the level of business there, if you like, in these places?
I don't know. I think I'd have to, again, no two towns are the same, but I think, you know, when you look at, as Liam said, we commissioned Aero to do a significant body of work for us. That's set out in Appendix 18. If you want to have a look at it, it's a big chunky document, so be patient when you open it. But there's you know, you look at the demographics, you look at the socioeconomic profiles, you look at the age profiles, you look at the housing tenure, you look at the educational profiles of our smaller settlements. None of it is going the right direction, if you know what I mean. And now I know we only had a snapshot of 2016, but you know, there are significant challenges that we need to address. And I think, you know, that if you were to pick three of them, and maybe, you know, you could pin three issues to each of those, to all of those settlements, probably to varying degrees within each of them, but they would be, you know, provision of facilities, community and infrastructure, provision of housing, affordable housing, and provision of, I suppose, capacity there for employment and commercial activity. I think if we could achieve all those three issues to varying degrees across all those settlements, we'd be in a very good place, and I think we'd have, you know, to a certain extent, to be job done almost, in terms of, you know, making our city and county a more sustainable and resilient place.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Alan and Hugh. I'm just going to pop to another question here. I see there are some and some more from Rita there, but I'm just going to pop to Billy's question. I know Billy had to leave just now, but in terms of just more information on the Living City initiative, again, a link has been posted there to more information, but could somebody give maybe an overview of that Living City initiative and what it means?
I suppose we've been the planning, I suppose we haven't really been engaged in that. It has been operated through economic development, but I think it was a little bit targeted and maybe a little bit maybe not suited to Waterford City in terms of the sort of the properties and the various I suppose criteria for being eligible, but it had limited enough success, I think. You know, limited enough interest in it, and I'm not sure. I don't know. Has that been the general consensus? You know, across you know, at a national level, probably a little bit more successful in some locations. But I wouldn't be the person to ask, I think, but we could try and get information on it if needed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hugh. Rita, I'll just go to your question there related to the population data sets. I know, Liam, you came in there with an answer. Were the same population data sets used for all settlements, metropolitan areas, and in the wider county? So would anybody in the team like to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't know if, yeah, I think, yeah, it was the same population. I'm just trying to back on the presentation we gave last Tuesday night, this night week, which looked at the core strategy and the population. So that was really, I suppose, what we inherited from the National Planning Framework and the Regional Spatial Economic Strategy is a population target, and I suppose to some extent an equation as to how that could be, I suppose, divvied up across the different settlements in terms of the city and Dungarvan, Tramore, and the other urban settlements in particular. Our core strategy, we're obliged under the legislation to I suppose look at those urban settlements. So any settlement with a population over 1,500, we have to provide a specific target for it. So we have the population targets in the plan, or in the draft plan, are based on that formula in the main. and then we have to give an aggregate rural figure. So any of the settlements below 50 and the I suppose the broader rural county has an aggregate figure associated with it, but they all use the same basis. They're all based on 2016 on a growth figure based on the 2016 census. It's unfortunate, I suppose, to some extent that we're working on a 2016 data set, but we won't have another census till 2022, I think, at the minute. I think is the date. So you know, we'll have it next time around. It's a little bit unfortunate because I suppose most of the development plans across the county have been prepared either in the last 12, 18 months, I suppose, in the main. So we're sort of falling a little bit short of the new data that we'll have in a year's time.
And somebody else, the team wants to come in. Sorry, was there somebody coming in there?
Sorry, Vanessa,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead,
Rita
Rita.
here. The reason I asked that question was because I was looking at Dungarvan and Tramore a couple of years ago, and the previous plan I noticed had used like small settlement data from CSO for one of the settlements, and it had used it from another data set from CSO for Dungarvan, say. And whilst it didn't make much difference for Tramore, it did make a fair bit of difference for Dungarvan. I think I can't remember now. Maybe it was like 900 and something people population in the difference, and then also there was another data set for the wastewater treatment plant, because that took in Ballon Road and all the way out on the coast, the new settlement there. So yeah, and there seems to be a bit of lack of integration there between the EPA and, you know, what's used in the development plan. So I suppose I was just trying to know, particularly with the CSO data sets, was it the same one? Because one was the settlement size, the footprint, and the other one was, I can't remember them now, I'd have to go back and look at it. And it did make a difference for Dungarvan, was all I was saying, really.
Yeah, well, I think we, as part of the regional spatial economic strategy, Dungarvan, when you look at Dungarvan on its own, you look at Tramore, Tramore is larger, marginally by about that 800 or 900, I think, off the top of my head, maybe a little more. But I suppose what happened with the spatial economic strategy is that you know, there was an examination, I suppose, of not only the size of a town but also its function. Basically, looking at whether a town is self-sustaining or not. You know, has it got all the attributes that a town needs to have in terms of employment, retail, communities, facilities, you know, amenities, those sort of issues. And I think, you know, you could probably label Dungarvan as the old county town, in the way you could say, for instance, if you take Tipperary, you could call sort of Clonmel Tipperary town maybe, and Nina as the old county towns, if you like, because they're sort of big market function and they're large catchment. So what the RSES did, it identified a number of key towns. So Dungarvan, I suppose, when you take it in association with Ballinroad, which, you know, they're linked, I suppose, physically almost and functionally. They do have a population over 10,000, so they do fit into that sort of criteria of being a key town. So that's where the sort of the structure has come from. So when you look at the core strategy and the settlement hierarchy, you see Waterford City at the top, and you see Dungarvan, Ballinroad just below it, and our little piece of Clonmel Environs is there as well. The Clonmel Environs, as I said last week, is and it could be a little bit like what the other issue you raised, Rita, the fact that one was a settlement and the population was taken from that, and the population elsewhere was taken from the SAPs. The fact that I suppose Dungarvan is a defined settlement, as is Ballinroad. In the CSO, there's a fairly neat sort of figure around the population there. When you look at Clonmel Environs, part of that, only part of that is relevant only part of Clonmel is relevant to us in terms of the population base. So I suppose we derived our population element of that by way of a geodirectory search, just looking at the number of address points that we have in County in the Clonmel environs area, and attributing the national average, the NPF household size of 2.5 people to that, and we ran the formula on that basis, so that, you know, that there's a few different sort of nuances around the population, but in the main, the urban ones, as I said, are based on the defined settlement population as set out in the CSO, the 2016 census.
Thanks.
I think, Vanessa, you're on mute there, I think.
Apologies. Thank you. Liam, did you want to come in on that? I just saw you unmuting.
No, I think you answered it. I think, you know, it's probably down to the fact that Dungarvan had it was a planning authority all of its own, and it had a mapped extent, and the population reflected the mapped extent of Dungarvan as a planning authority in its own right.
Perfect. Thanks, Liam. I'm just conscious that we're coming near the end of our session. There's just one more question there, both from Alan and Rita, and you might just have a comment on it. It just relates to whether the county has a sustainability officer, or if that's the brief of a particular person, or that's distributed through teams.
Yeah, well, that would be something that's dealt with across the organisation. There isn't a particular individual who's responsible for ensuring sustainability. I'm sure, you know, the chairman of the council is responsible. The chief executive of the council is responsible. You know, everything that we do has to be guided by sustainability principles. It's not something that, you know, we just, you know, give to one individual and we parcel off to one side. It runs through everything that we do, or should do at least.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. Did that answer your question, Henrietta?
Yes, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, we're near the end of our session.
Sorry, Vanessa, just sorry, I was trying to
go ahead.
I was muted. But just in relation to that, I suppose we have we've attempted with a limited resources to compile that list of 8 I suppose locally derived strategic development goals that are set out in section 1.6 of the draft. So I think, you know, if there is any I suppose comments or any thoughts that you might have around those, that they could be tweaked or improved, or maybe we need maybe we don't cover enough, or we should cover some of the topics differently, certainly we'd be happy to hear and to take on board any sort of submissions in relation to that. It's something that we haven't done before. We were looking around at how other sort of cities and municipalities or other sort of local authorities across Europe would have dealt with it, and without a bucket load of resources at it, and spending maybe a year trying to pull these things together. We had to come up with some sort of rationale behind it, and I think we've done it fairly well. That's my view, of course, but I think if we had any input or any thoughts around that, we'd certainly welcome them, because they're very important, I think.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Hugh and Alan and Rita, for that. I'm now going to hand over to Liam just to close out the session. But first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for their participation in the discussion. And I hope you found that all of your questions were answered in preparation for you making a submission, of course, before the 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. So Liam, I'll just hand over to you now to close out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, just thanks for everybody for your time, for participating this evening. We had 3 good sessions last week. This is the first of 3 sessions this week. So we're on again tomorrow night and the night after. If you want to join us, you're all more than welcome. Your contributions this evening have been recorded, and we'll take again all of the comments that came in through the chat box, and we'll use those to inform the conversation as we move forward. But I would say there's no substitute for a submission from yourselves, a direct submission. You know, while we can certainly benefit from these conversations, these two-way conversations, there's a formal process that has to be gone through next, which is a report by the chief executive to the members of the local authority, and that has to list all of the individuals and all of the groups that made submissions, and it has to list the issues that were raised, and it has to make comment, written comment on each one of the views and the submissions that were made to us. So that's how you get formally involved in the process. You know, this is more informal, this is questions and answers, this is conversation. But if you want to have your views formally recorded, I would suggest that you do make a submission. That way you're registered on our system, you're informed at every step of the process going forward. The portal will update you, say, you know, it's something that Anna raised there, you know, the chief executive's report, you know, where do you get feedback? So that's something obviously that we've heard tonight, and we'll make sure that as we move forward that, you know, anybody that makes a submission, anybody that participates in the process, that you're alerted at different stages in the process from here on out, and that you're kept informed of what's happening. And as I said, we're open to phone calls, emails, dialogue with yourselves or with anybody else between now and the end of August. We are generally speaking, but we're in a formal public consultation mode now at the moment. So if you need to follow up with us, the website has our phone number, it's got our email address. We're available to talk to you at any stage about anything that is concerning you, but I just can't stress the importance of making a submission. If there's anything at all that you feel strongly about, no matter how big or how small the issue, put it down in writing, send it in to us. If it's a matter for the development plan, we'll address it. If it's not, if it's an operational issue, well then, you know, we'll refer it on to the correct people to deal with those sort of those smaller, less strategic operational issues. But, you know, whatever we need to do, we will.